Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, guys, based on the time zones you all are coming from. So, guys, before we start with the session, can you all please give me a quick confirmation if you all can see my screen and hear me loud and clear as well? Perfect. Thank you so much for the confirmation, everyone. So, before we get started, let me quickly introduce myself to you all first. So, my name is 𝐑𝐨𝐥𝐞-𝐁𝐚𝐬𝐞, and I have been working in this IT industry for more than 13 years now. So the main agenda for today's session, we are going to discuss on what exactly Angular is, what is new in Angular 9. Then we are going to discuss on the concepts for Angular 8 IB, Angular 9 AOT, what exactly these are and where we have to use which, and how the project is structured in Angular, what do we mean by TypeScript, how Angular loads, and the components of Angular. And then we are going to discuss the planning of an application that goes into an Angular. So these are the pointers that we are going to cover along with seeing a small hands-on on which we can get started. So let's get started. So first of all, if we talk about Angular, then Angular is a framework. It's a framework that is mostly popular for developing the web app-based application. Now, when we say framework, what exactly we mean by framework? It's like a complete base template that we can make use of, on which we can start developing the entire web-based application. For example, let's say if we are looking to develop any website out of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So either we can create all the functions from scratch, we can write the entire code from scratch, or we can use a complete base which will contain certain functionalities already defined. We don't have to write these codes from scratch, and then we can start building the web application on top of it. So that exactly is what we mean by framework. So framework ensures that we are all the other pages. So for example, if we are defining multiple applications, multiple components, then they should all have a homogeneous structure as they are going to be developed on a single framework. And that exactly Angular is. Angular is basically a web-based framework, which is based on TypeScript, on which we can get started. So typically, JavaScript is used for the interface and interactions, slideshows, and all the other interactive components. And JavaScript evolves quickly and has been one of the main language used for server-side programming. Like we have Node.js, we use it for game development and multiple other use cases. All right. And that's why Angular is considered as a client-side JavaScript framework that was specifically designed to help developers build the SPAs. SPAs refers to the single page application. For example, we can see Google Drive, we have Google Maps. Again, these are a single page dashboard. We don't have multiple other pages, right? And that exactly is what Angular is. So if we talk about front-end development framework, so front-end development is all about the parts of the website that users see, and it is also referred as a CSS framework because just like we have Bootstrap, so in Bootstrap we have predefined styling, we have predefined functionalities that we can directly import into our application, and then we can use it, we can modify it as and when required. So this makes sure that we have a standard followed for the entire project that we are going to work on. And Angular, as we know, is maintained and developed by Google, just like we have Bootstrap. So Bootstrap is maintained by Twitter and was developed by Twitter. Same way the React library. So React is not a full-fledged framework. React is like a complete library which is managed by Facebook. And Google and this platform Angular is basically maintained and developed by Google. So it was developed by a community of individuals and corporations to address many of the challenges encountered in developing single page applications. So the main aim is to simplify both the development and the testing of such applications by providing a framework for client-side model, or we can say MVC, like we have a model view controller. And when we have model, view model, MVVM architecture. So if you talk about the entire base, then base, as we know, has been used for JavaScript. So JavaScript is a language of the web, and if you know JavaScript, we can talk to the browser like it is our best friend. We can do anything. We can do it. We can add any kind of functionality or interaction with any of the elements that we have specified on the page. And Angular is based on JavaScript and TypeScript, which is basically a superset of JavaScript altogether. And then it is mostly preferred for single page application. So single page application is an application that works inside a browser and does not require page reloading during use. For example, all the social media platforms, let's say Facebook. Now we can sit on Facebook and then we can perform infinite scroll, and even though whenever a new content is available, it gets pushed automatically without us needing to refresh or open up any other pages. Same way when we are working on Google Maps. Again, we don't have to do anything on Google Maps. So Google Maps is also an example for a single page application. So the entire interaction is based on the map itself, right? The entire interaction is based on the map itself, and that's how we start interacting it, correct? So again, we have the entire map, and again, whatever address we want to go to, for example, let's say we want to go to, suppose, Disneyland. Again, we can simply search for any particular place of interest, and then the entire background gets updated without refreshing or without going to any other page. A simple example for a single page application in which we can interact with anything, any component as per the example we want to see all the photos. Again, even the photos section has been opened up in the same page without us navigating to multiple pages, correct? And that exactly is what single page application is all about. It simply allows us to interact or perform all the activity. It allows the end users to perform all the activities without navigating to multiple pages. And single page application, for even for the websites, it was popular back in 2015, but since it had some issues with the SEO of the websites, that's what was one of the main reason it was not that much popular for the commercial websites because of negative impacts on the SEO. So now if we talk about Angular 9, so applications in Angular 9 are Ivy compliant by default. So Angular applications is compiled ahead of time. That is, the browser downloads and runs it. That's why it is called as a client side framework. It's basically considered as a client side framework. And Angular 9 requires the TypeScript. So it requires TypeScript version 3.7, and any lower versions are not supported by Angular 9. So basically TypeScript, if you have any queries, and TypeScript is basically a programming language which is maintained by Microsoft, and it is like a superscript, and it simply adds the organic state as compared to JavaScript. All right. And the TS library is also a peer dependency rather than a direct one available in Angular 9. So now if we talk about Angular 8 Ivy, so if you talk about the view engine, the Ivy modified and Ivy compressed, then Angular's 9 compiling and rendering engine is referred as Ivy. So once the entire application is completed, again, the rendering engine used by Angular, that is what Ivy is. So basically, Ivy is smaller bundle size and is very helpful when it comes down to debugging, and it provides faster compilation as compared to other engines. For example, if you talk about the Vue engine, it takes almost 36 seconds, whereas the same thing can be done in just 7.3 by Ivy minified and 2.7 by using Ivy compressed as a part of the content that we have defined as a part of the Ivy framework. So apart from now, basically now, if you talk about a single use case, then for example, the simplest Hello World program was about 36 KB, which is quite a large bundle size for a simple Hello World program, right? So the Angular team decided that they will keep a threshold value of 10 KB. And this was called as a cake threshold because the head of the team decided to give the team or the cake, in the case they reduced the bundle size to below 10 KB. That was the main idea behind naming it as a cake size, or you can say cake threshold. So the team was successful in reducing the bundle size to nearly about 7.3 KB, as you can see here. with the minified IB version, and something even better at 2.7 KB with the IP compressed version. So earlier it was 36 KB by default, because again, if you talk about a simple hello world program, then it is there again, for simple hello world program, 36 KB is also a large size. But the team was able, and they were given a goal of reducing it to 10 KB, and the team achieved 7.3 KB for verified and 2.7 KB for the compressed version. And if you talk about the advantages of using IB, then they are multiple. Again, it simply makes sure that we have a smaller bundle size, and it offers a large, or it's a faster compilation as well. Next, we have AOT. Next, we have Angular AOT. So basically, AOT, now as we discussed, AOT is basically used for a faster compilation. For example, AOT along with IB speeds up the creation of the applications altogether, right? So it simply helps us in compilation of the HTML and TypeScript into JavaScript before the browser downloads and executed. So basically, if we talk about the AOT again, when we are using the AOT, the rendering becomes much faster. And this is because the browser can download a pre-compiled version of the project, and then it can load the executable code. And this helps the application to render instantly without it having to compile the code first. And the AOT compiler will inline all the external HTML and CSS within the application's JavaScript, which in turn eliminates the discrete AJAX request for these sourced files. And when the application are already compiled, then there is no need to download the Angular compiler. And this helps in reducing the size of the Angular framework being downloaded, as the compiler is half the size of Angular itself. And Angular's AOT compiler will help us in finding the template errors during the build process itself, and reduction in injection attacks as the HTML templates are precompiled into JavaScript before they are rendered on the client side, thereby providing a better security of the application as well. So these things are again defined in AOT. So before we discuss over the project structure, first of all, let's discuss on TypeScript. So TypeScript, as we know, is basically a superset of JavaScript, which is designed and still maintained by Microsoft. And if we talk about the project setup, for example, or we can say a complete project structure. So first of all, we have to download Angular. Now for working with Angular, first of all, we can download the Node.js package in our system. So for downloading the Node.js package, we can refer to this link here called nodejs.org/download, and we will be able to download Node.js. So based on the environment, we can choose Node.js. Here we can choose Node.js MSI installer or zip packet. Basically, on depending upon the platform, we can download the package. Once we have installed it, we can check. Now to check if we have properly installed Node.js or not, we can open up the command prompt. We can open up the command prompt, and then in the command prompt, we can type in the, no, let's do one thing. Let's increase the font size just to avoid strain to your eyes. Now, to check if we have Node properly installed or not, so here we can simply check for the Node version. If Node is currently installed, we will be able to see the Node version returned to us. So currently we have installed version 12.18.2. So once we have installed it, now to install the Angular, so basically here we can start downloading the Angular package that we can work with. So here we can define npm. Now basically in order to start working on the installation of Angular, so here we can use npm. Npm is basically like a node package manager, and then we can use install, and then from the global package we have a global, and then we have a local package. So from global package we can download the Angular CLI. With Angular CLI that we can specify here. If Angular is already installed, then this is going to be to complete quickly. If it is not, then again it is going to take a couple of minutes for installation of the entire Angular CLI from scratch. So once the Angular CLI has been installed from the npm, so we can directly use ng, and then we can using the ng basically stands for Angular, and using the Angular we can create a new app that is going to be deployed in the current folder that we are currently working on. So as you can see, this has been configured. Now to start creating a new application, we can use ng as an Angular, and here we can define new as a new application, and let's say we name the application as, suppose, my app itself, a simple my app. So here a new folder by the name of my app is going to be created in this directory with having all the Angular setup done, and then we can switch to this particular directory. Also, when we are setting up the entire project, we can choose what kind of CSS we want to use. For example, the style sheet, we can use the SAS-based style sheet. We can use a CSS. We can stick to CSS for now. So this is going to install all the required packages from Angular, and then we can switch to this directory. So it may take a while for this entire package to be configured fully. So let's wait for a second. So as you can see now, it has been configured. So now if we want, we can simply switch to my app. So here we can switch to my app that we have currently created. If we want to see the complete folder structure that has been created by Angular, let's navigate to this folder in our C drive. We can go to the project structure. Now in here we can see my app folder has been created, and in here the entire module for Angular has been structured. The entire Angular module has been currently structured here. All right, so now let's do one thing. Let's understand each and every component for Node so we can have a better clarity out of it. So now we can do one thing. Let's open this up in any of the IDs if we want. For example, here, now once we are done with installation, we can now to start the application, we can use, and now we can switch to the directory, and then we can use ng-serve open. ng-serve open. So this is going to open the Angular package, and then we can get started. And now once we have served the application, now we can see on a local host on port 4200, this entire Angular application has been currently launched. So as you can see here, the port 4200 has been opened up in the local host, and we can see the Angular application has been defined. Now we can use any of the core editors to work on Angular. So here, if we want, we can use Sublime Text. We can also use Visual Studio Code as well for starting our work on developing the code. So Visual Studio Code is basically like a code editor, which is available for free by Microsoft. So there is no licensing required here. So if we have now, once we have installed it now, we can open this up. Let's say we open this up system. So here we can use Visual Studio Code. Let's search for it. So we can use any of the versions as part of the requirement. So let's do one thing. Let's open up one directory here. So here we can click on open folder. Now let's do one thing. Let's open the folder of the project that we have configured. So we can go to C drive, users. On a user, we can navigate to the user. And here we have my app. So we can open this up. So currently, if we talk about the my app, then here we can see the entire folder structure has been currently opened up, right? So if we talk about the entire folder structure, then we have my app, and then we have source and other components defined here. So first of all, if we talk about the E2E folder, first of all, we can see we have something called as E2E folder. So the E2E stands for end-to-end testing, and let me just highlight this part. So this folder here called as E2E. So E2E refers to end-to-end testing, also known as the integration testing, which provides a high-level overview for the web application. So the E2E folder consists of the specs and the configuration files. And the E2E are powered by a testing library called as Protector, and an E2E test runner that can take scenario tests and run them in the browser. Then we have node modules. We have node modules folder. So basically, Under node modules, we can see all the npm packages that this application is currently having. We can see all the application that the entire node module has, which we can use anytime when we want to refer them as a part of the project. Then we have source folder. So under source, so basically source consists of three subfolders. We have the application, we have assets, environment. So basically, and then there are multiple files, including the favicon, index, and main.ts. And then we have the application folder. So under source, we have application. So the application folder contains a component in which the logic and data is going to be defined. The app component.ts, which is available here. For example, here we have app, and here we have app component.ts. So basically, this file contains, let's just zoom out a bit. So basically, this file contains the TypeScript, which defines the logic for the app's root component, named as app component altogether, as you can see here. And then we have app component.html. So basically, whatever we are seeing in the browser, this is going to be saved as a part of app component.html. That means whatever we can see in the browser, this my app, again, whatever we are seeing here, this is all based on the HTML component that has been defined here. For example, let's say if we remove the entire HTML and if we define, okay, only h1, suppose everything in center, and under h1 here we define welcome or welcome to Edureka. So if we save it, we will be, if we come back to the application, we will be able to see this welcome to Edureka has been updated as part of the content that we had deployed currently using the Angular framework. And whatever changes we do here, for example, if we apply some HR lines here, if as soon as we save it, we can come back, we can see the same change is going to be reflected here, right? So basically this contains the end HTML file that is going to be rendered. And then we have CSS is also available. Like we have app component.css. So if we want to apply any styling on any of the elements that we have referred in this HTML folder, then we can define the styling back in the CSS. For example, currently we have only one h1 element available in this particular page. Now let's say we want to make this h1 red in color. So in app component.css, here we can define the h1 color. It's like a style sheet. So let's say we want to change the color to suppose red. We can define red. As soon as we save it, we can see the same change is going to be automatically reflected on the component that we have defined here as a part of app component CSS. And let's say if we want to integrate any other frameworks, for example, let's say we are building the application on Angular, but we want to integrate the Bootstrap CSS. For example, we have Bootstrap framework. Now we want to apply the Bootstrap styling on this application, then we can do that easily by integrating the Bootstrap CSS file as well. Now, let's say we have defined the Angular, we have defined the Angular setup, and then we have defined the components as a part of app component.html. Now, if we are looking to import any of the components as a part of, or if we are looking to integrate some third-party framework into Angular, then we can also do that. For example, let's say we want to include Bootstrap framework into Angular. Now, Bootstrap is also one of the frameworks, correct? So we can define, if we want to integrate Bootstrap into Angular, then first of all, we have to get the CDN. So there are two ways. Either we can download the local files for Bootstrap framework and then we can integrate that, or we can simply add the Bootstrap as a part of the HTML file and then it is going to be rendered in the browser. We can do both the activities. So let's say if we want to integrate the Bootstrap framework with Angular, then first of all, we can get this CDN for Bootstrap. So here we can click on download Bootstrap. So either we can work with the local files or we can get the Bootstrap CDN directly. So we can copy the Bootstrap framework and then we have to make sure that we whenever we are defining, see at the end we have to, now once we have copied the Bootstrap CDN, then we have to come back to our project structure and in here we have to click on index.html. So basically whatever we see in the browser, that is basically the output of the index.html, and in here we have defined the app root being the component that is going to be called here. correct? As in the app component.html, which is being rendered here. So now if we want to use the Bootstrap CDN, so we have to navigate to index.html, and just before closing the head tag, we can enter the CDNs. That means the style sheet and the JS file that we want to use as a part of the framework. So as we know, Bootstrap can be implemented by two ways. Either we can download the source files and then we can refer to the source files in the index document, or without downloading the files for Bootstrap, we can refer to the CDN link. So just like we integrate any third-party images or files in the HTML document, we can integrate the Bootstrap framework by using the CDN link, and that's how we can enter them in the index.html. So once we are done, we can save it. And now if we come back to our own application, we would be able to see the Bootstrap styling has automatically been applied to the application here. So as you can see, the styling for the text has also been changed because we already have a predefined styling in H1. Now let's say we want to insert some kind, or no, we want to insert more elements, then we can come back to app component.html. Let's say here we add another, for example, here we add a simple button. For example, here we can define a button by using button, and let's say we want to define the button as get started. We can close the button, we can save it. As you can see, this default button has been currently placed. Now let's say we want to use the styling of Bootstrap. Now in Bootstrap, we have multiple predefined classes that we can refer, and we can call it in any of the element that we are going to define, so that we can apply the styling accordingly. For example, let's say we want to define a styling for this button. So here we can define div class. And now in Bootstrap, we already have a class defined for button. And we know that in CSS, we can integrate multiple classes together. We can add multiple classes together. Let's say we want to call some Bootstrap classes here. So we can define the class, and we already have a class defined by the name of button. And suppose we want to use as button success. So again, these are the classes already defined in Bootstrap. So you can call this class. Once we save it, if we come back, we can see the styling has automatically been applied to this button as per the element what we defined under Bootstrap, right? So let's say if we want to add more classes, for example, here we want to place a Jumbotron on top. So here we can use, suppose, a division, and here we can define division, suppose, first of all, as row or as container. As container, let's say we can remove the center point component here. So here we can open a, suppose, div class as, suppose, container, and then we can place div class here we can define as row, and here we can create a simple Jumbotron as well. Suppose here we can place a simple Jumbotron, and then we can place the elements inside this Jumbotron accordingly. For example, here we can have H1, here we can have a button also defined. If we keep on saving here, we can see, if we simply hit refresh, we will be able to see the elements will be called automatically, and they are going to be saved as well as a part of the framework, whatever we had defined here. For example, currently we had defined this for a single row, correct? Now we want to add the styling, further styling to this Jumbotron that we have called along with Bootstrap. Then here we can define, for example, here we define row, and here we can define a complete class, suppose as div class as call md12 for a full length class that we want to, for a full, we can see if we want to create a full division class, and here we can use call md12. If we want to add styling to it, we want to place everything in center, so we can place everything in center as well. Inside this Jumbotron, we can use center, or suppose if we don't want to use the color as red, so here we can define color as white as well. And if you want to use, suppose for Jumbotron that we are going to use here, so here we have defined a class as Jumbotron. Now for Jumbotron, we want to specify some kind of gradient as well. For example, here we want to add a gradient, and here we can define the background color as gradient. Suppose here we can define the CSS. So here we can define background image, and under image here we can define linear, or suppose linear gradient, or suppose we want to go from top to right or right to bottom. So here we can define the enter. For example, here we want to define linear gradient, and then we want to define from to right. So here we can define to right, and we want to apply gradient from deep red. Or for example, suppose here we want to define multiple other color groups. For example, let's say here we want to go from not deep pink. Suppose here we want to go from hot pink to suppose dark purple. Suppose here we want to go from hot pink to suppose indigo or dark violet. For example, hot pink to dark violet. Then here we can define the color accordingly. Dark violet. So now if we say this, now same thing is going to be applicable on the image that we have currently defined. So depending upon the use case, we can apply multiple styling to the CSS. So again, whatever we want to define here, the same thing is going to be applicable on the CSS accordingly. So whatever styling we can define here, we can integrate multiple other frameworks. We can define the components. That means in Angular, we can treat different components altogether. So here we can have different styling defined for different components, and then we can treat them accordingly. So it all comes down to our own requirement, how we want to develop the application, and then get started on an application by using the framework. So let's say if we want to create more app components here, so here we can create a more app component, and that has to be included as a part of app component.ts. So let's say if we want to have a different app component that we want to integrate here. So here we can change the template URL to some different component, and then we can have a different CSS also defined if we want to have a different app component also defined. And we are also going to discuss on the entire components as well. It means how we can divide the application into the component section. For example, suppose if we talk about the components involved here, so each and every area of the application can be divided into simple components. For example, we may have different components. For example, we have a different component for the menu. We can have different components for each and every application as a part of the component structure that is followed by Angular. So we can have a root component, and then we can have a separate component, let's say for browser. We can create a separate component for the home page. And again, in home page, let's suppose we have a slider, then slider can be considered as a different component. We have a separate section for the gallery that we have created. Again, that can be considered as a different component. We want to have a different component for the review section that we have specified, and that can be considered as a different component. So depending upon the requirement, we can choose different component accordingly. Thank you so much for joining, guys, and have a great day ahead. Take care. Bye-bye.